My name is Laura Mitchell, and I am 30 years old. 4 weeks ago, my parents quietly erased me from my grandfather's will without ever changing a single document. The $450,000 Grandpa George left solely for me vanished overnight, redirected to buy my younger brother Kevin a pristine new house inside a gated community outside Seattle. They told themselves comforting lies that Grandpa was too frail in the nursing home to notice that I was too obedient, too unseen to resist. They were wrong. When I finally sat beside his bed in the quiet room overlooking the gray lake rain tapping the window with familiar persistence, I told him everything. I told him about the drained account, the deed bearing Kevin's name the way my parents smiled while calling it a family investment. Grandpa didn't gasp or shout, he didn't need to. He simply watched me with the same steady focus that once built bridges and companies, then reached for his phone, with a hand that still remembered precision. He dialed one number, waited, and spoke 7 words that cracked their perfect illusion. "It's time for them to meet my attorney." The line went silent. He ended the call, turned to me, and added calmly, "They've borrowed enough." That was the moment everything changed. Before I take you to what detonated at my parents' wedding anniversary party, when that single call exploded in front of their business partners, neighbors, and Kevin's unsuspecting fiancée Sarah, pause for 1 second. If betrayal like this feels personal, hit like. If you want more stories that cut straight to the bone, subscribe. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there, because I read every word. That was the day I understood worth. The call came on a Wednesday afternoon, right after my shift ended. I was stuck in Seattle traffic, the rain turning the freeway into a slow crawl of red taillights and frustrated horns, when my phone rang. It was Dad. Voice clipped and urgent. "Grandpa had a heart episode. He's stable, but they're moving him to the nursing home by the lake. Family meeting here in an hour." I didn't argue. I just turned the car around, wipers slapping against the windshield, and drove straight to their house overlooking the water. By the time I walked in, Dad and Mom were already in the living room with Kevin, the air thick with that familiar mix of efficiency and dismissal. Dad stood with his arms crossed, the posture he used when he was handing out orders. Mom sat on the edge of the couch, phone in hand, like she was ready to schedule everything away. Kevin lounged back, scrolling property photos on his screen, only looking up when I shut the door. "Good you're here," Dad said without preamble. "We need to sort out visits." No warmth, no, "How are you holding up?" Just the business of it. Dad laid it out quickly. Grandpa needed daily check-ins. "Your mom and I have back-to-back showings and closings," he said. "Kevin's in the final stretch with Sarah's family. They're particular about image. So Laura, you'll take the visits. Your office admin hours are flexible." I felt the familiar sting, the one I'd swallowed for years. I managed 40 hours of emails, reports, and client calls every week, but in their eyes it was flexible because it wasn't real estate. I opened my mouth to push back, to say my job had value too, but the words dissolved. "Of course," I said instead. "I want to be with him." Mom gave me that look, then the one that said I was useful in small doses. "At least you're good for something," she said, voice light but cutting. Kevin finally set his phone down. "Appreciate it, sis. Sarah's parents are old money, they judge everything. The new house will make the right statement." Dad nodded approvingly. "Mr. Lawson is my top client right now. We're negotiating a major commercial deal. Kevin needs to show stability, and that house seals it." I stood there, water dripping from my coat onto their polished floor, listening to them map out Kevin's perfect future on the back of Grandpa's money, the money meant for me, while I was slotted into the role of daily caregiver. No one asked how I felt about the house or the money. No one mentioned Grandpa's wishes. They just kept talking logistics, Kevin grinning about how the new place would impress Sarah's circle, Dad already planning his next meeting with Lawson. As I grabbed my keys to leave, I caught Mom's whisper to Kevin, "She'll handle it, she always does." The rain hit harder when I stepped outside, pounding the roof of my car. As I sat there for a moment, engine running, the conversation still echoing in my head like a door slamming shut. I started visiting Grandpa every day after work, cutting through the steady Seattle drizzle to the nursing home by the lake where the water stayed flat and gray under the clouds. The place had its own rhythm, nurses moving quietly down hallways, the low hum of oxygen machines, the occasional clink of trays from the dining area. Grandpa's room caught the afternoon light off the lake, and he'd be waiting in his chair by the window, sharper than the doctors gave him credit for, despite the heart failure stealing his strength bit by bit. We talked about my days first, the endless spreadsheets, the client calls that dragged on the way. I still double-checked every report because that's how I'd always worked. One evening, he brought up college again, and the memory came back clear. Those years when I balanced classes with 2 part-time jobs, waitressing nights, and filing paperwork weekends, scraping together enough to pay tuition, without touching loans my parents would have used as leverage. "You learned early what effort really costs," he said, eyes fixed on the water. "Most people never do." He shifted, then voice dropping lower, and told me the inheritance was mine, $450,000 locked in a trust he'd set up quietly years before. "Because you never asked for what wasn't earned," he explained. "They reach because they assume it's theirs. You build because you know nothing comes free." The words settled between us, simple and solid, like the engineering blueprints he'd drawn for decades. He wasn't done. "I've watched your father and mother change over time," he continued. "I saw the signs 5 years ago, the way they started eyeing my accounts like extensions of their own plans. That's why I built the trust. If they misuse it, there will be consequences. Real ones. Actions carry their own weight. Laura and yours have always been heavier than theirs." He spoke with the calm precision of the retired engineer. He'd been every sentence measured, no room for exaggeration. We moved on to lighter things. How he'd once fixed a bridge design that saved a company millions. How he'd learned patience from watching structures hold under pressure. But the warning lingered. Each visit ended the same way. He'd grip my hand still firm despite everything and say, "Keep coming back. You're the one who keeps things real." As the routine settled in, the nursing home started feeling less like an ending and more like a place where truths could still be laid out plain. When he repeated the part about consequences one afternoon, the lake reflecting the low clouds outside, the words carried a quiet finality. Hearing him lay it out so matter-of-factly, I couldn't help wondering whether my family had ever truly understood the value in each other, or if they only saw what they wanted to claim. 3 weeks into the daily visits, an email alert flashed across my phone while I was still sitting in Grandpa's room, folding his blanket the way he liked it. The bank notification was blunt, large, outgoing transfer of $450,000 from his account. My pulse spiked. I opened the app immediately, fingers shaking, and there it was, the funds wired to a title company 2 days earlier for a residential purchase under Kevin's name. The address matched the gated community he'd been talking about. I didn't wait. I drove to my parents' house straight from the nursing home, the rain sheeting across the windshield as I rehearsed what I would say. When I pushed open the door, Dad was at the kitchen island reviewing contracts, Mom flipping through a real estate magazine, Kevin sprawled on the couch with his phone. I held up my phone screen, glowing. "The inheritance is gone. $450,000 transferred for Kevin's house. You took it." Dad looked up, slowly setting his pen down. Mom closed the magazine with a soft snap. Kevin sat up, a slow grin spreading. "Whoa, calm down. It's not gone, it's invested." Dad leaned back. "We needed liquidity for Kevin's future. Sarah's family expects a certain standard. Mr. Lawson is ready to sign the partnership papers, and the house shows Kevin is serious." I stared. "Grandpa promised it to me, in the trust. You knew." Kevin dangled a set of shiny keys from his finger, twirling them lazily. "Appreciate the concern, sis, but thanks for the upgrade. The place has a killer view, 4 bedrooms, perfect for impressing Sarah's crowd. Come by any time." His tone dripped satisfaction, like he'd won something fair. Mom stood up, stepping between us. "Your grandfather is in the nursing home for a reason. He doesn't need the money now. We did what was best." I turned to Dad. "You withdrew it without permission. That's theft." Dad's expression stayed even. It's family money. He would understand if he were thinking clearly. The lake outside the window looked black under the clouds, mirroring the cold knot in my chest. Mom moved closer, voice low and deliberate. If you run to him with this, and the stress triggers another episode, if his heart gives out because of the shock, that will be on you forever. Do you want to carry that guilt for the rest of your life? The words hit like a calculated strike, twisting the knife of responsibility I'd always felt in this family. Kevin chuckled softly, still playing with the keys. Don't be dramatic, just let it go. I looked at their faces, Dad's unyielding practicality, Mom's quiet threat, Kevin's smug ease, and saw the plan they'd built without a single crack of doubt. He has a right to know what happened to his money, I said, voice steady despite the tremor inside. And I won't keep it from him. I turned on my heel and left the door closing behind me with a final click as the rain hammered harder against the roof of my car. The drive back felt longer than usual, the wipers struggling against the downpour, while their words looped in my head like a warning I couldn't ignore. That night, I sat alone in my apartment on the edge of suburban Seattle, the rain drumming steadily against the single window overlooking the parking lot lights. The space felt smaller than usual, just a couch, a small table, and the quiet hum of the refrigerator. Nothing like the sprawling house my parents had just secured for Kevin. I kept replaying the confrontation, the keys swinging from his finger. Mom's calculated warning about guilt, Dad's matter-of-fact tone, as if the money had always been theirs to spend. Anger gave way to something colder, a clarity that I couldn't keep this from Grandpa any longer. Sleep came in fragments. When it did, I dreamed of being 8 years old again, sitting on the porch steps, while Grandpa showed me how to tighten a loose screw on the old porch railing. Everything has a right way, he said, guiding my small hands. Rush it and it falls apart. Do it properly, and it lasts. The dream blurred into him, teaching me to save my allowance in a jar, explaining that real security came from what you built yourself, not what others handed over. I woke before sunrise, the lake fog thick beyond the window, and decided. I drove to the nursing home as soon as visiting hours opened, the roads slick and empty. Grandpa was already awake, coffee steaming beside him, gazing out at the water. I sat close and told him the full story. The bank alert, the transfer, the house now in Kevin's name, the way my parents had dismissed Grandpa's wishes as outdated. He listened in silence, face unchanging, no outburst, no tremor. When I finished, he simply smiled, a quiet, knowing curve of the lips that said this moment had been waiting. I expected they might, he said softly. He picked up his phone from the bedside table, thumbed through contacts with steady fingers and dialed. Edward, he said when the line connected. It's time. He ended the call and looked at me. Edward Klein has handled my affairs for 30 years. He'll lay it out for you. The following morning, I met Edward in his downtown office, a compact space lined with dark wood shelves and the faint scent of coffee and leather. He was late 60s, silver hair, neatly combed glasses catching the light as he gestured to a chair. Your grandfather instructed me to brief you fully. He began, opening a thick folder. The first page was the deed to my parents' house, still registered solely in Grandpa's name, no transfer deed ever filed. They've occupied it rent-free for a decade entirely at his discretion. Never legal ownership, my breath caught. Edward slid over another document. 5 years ago, your grandfather created an irrevocable trust. He anticipated patterns, your father's increasing assumptions, your mother's emphasis on status, and secured his assets accordingly. You are the sole beneficiary, the inheritance, the house deed, associated accounts. He paused, then opened a printed email thread dated 5 years back. This is correspondence from David inquiring about the deed's status. Your father knew it had not transferred yet. He authorized the withdrawal. The revelation landed like a quiet bomb-proof. Dad had acted with full awareness. Edward closed the file. Your grandfather built in safeguards. The consequences are now active. As I left the building, The rain had eased into mist, but the implications pressed heavier than the weather ever could. When Edward explained the trust and showed me that old email from Dad, I suddenly wondered, if you were in my position, how far would you trust the promises your family made? 2 days before the anniversary, my phone rang while I was sorting through old boxes in my apartment, the rain steady against the window overlooking the parking lot lights. It was Grandpa's voice, thinner than before, but still carrying that engineer's precision. Laura, Sunday is your parents' anniversary. Be there. Bring patience. He paused for a breath. Like when we tackled those engineering problems together. Don't let anger rush ahead. Let it wait until the moment is right. I told him I would, and he ended with a quiet, "See you then." His words echoed as I finished unpacking the box-faded photos from his career, a few tools he'd given me as a kid, and at the bottom a sealed envelope with my name in his careful script. I opened it slowly. Inside was a copy of the trust document from 5 years ago, crisp and official, clipped to a handwritten note. "Laura, you are the one I trust." No more explanation needed. The note said everything. I placed it beside the papers. Edward had provided the pieces locking together. Grandpa had anticipated the shift in my parents years earlier and quietly built a wall around what mattered. I walked to the window, staring at the distant lake through the mist, the water dark and restless under the low clouds. The anniversary felt like the storm that had been gathering all week, the kind Seattle delivered without fanfare, heavy, inevitable, washing away illusions. Patience seemed distant, but Grandpa's reminder anchored me. Anger spent too soon was anger lost. I spent the evening reviewing the documents again, highlighting the deed still in Grandpa's name, the trust's strict terms, the clause on unauthorized asset disposal. Each line reinforced the truth my parents had lived in a borrowed life. As Sunday drew closer, the tension wound tighter in my chest, equal parts dread and determination. I chose a simple black dress. Nothing showy, just something that felt steady. I pinned my hair back, looked in the mirror, and took a long breath. The rain intensified outside, tapping the glass like a countdown. Grandpa had set this in motion 5 years ago, and now the day had arrived. I grabbed my keys, the envelope secure in my bag, and stepped into the wet night, the lake view vanishing behind me as I drove toward the house where everything would finally break open. When Grandpa called to remind me about patience the way he had when we fixed things together, I suddenly realized the real storm wasn't the weather outside. It was the one waiting inside that house, and it had been gathering for years. Sunday arrived with pale sunlight cutting through the clouds as I drove to my parents' house by the lake for their anniversary. Cars filled the driveway, business contacts from Seattle's real estate world already gathered on the lawn with wine glasses and polite laughter. Inside the living room hummed with conversation, a gold-lettered banner stretched across the fireplace reading, "Happy Anniversary." Dad moved through the crowd with easy confidence, shaking hands and making small talk about market trends. Mom accepted compliments on her dress, smiling tightly. Kevin stood near the large windows overlooking the water, gesturing toward the driveway, where his new house sat gleaming under a red bow. I spotted Uncle Frank in the back corner, arms folded, watching everything with quiet intensity. Dad raised his glass for attention. 35 years of partnership, and today we have exciting news. Kevin's new home represents the strong future our family is building. He led the group outside where the house waited in the driveway, keys, now in Kevin's hand. Guests murmured approval. Mr. Lawson stepped forward to clap Kevin on the shoulder. "Solid choice, young man. This level of stability strengthens our negotiations. The partnership is moving ahead." Kevin grinned wide. "Couldn't have done it without the right support." Uncle Frank moved then, voice carrying over the chatter. "David, did you consult George before using his inheritance to buy this?" The crowd quieted. Dad's smile stiffened. "Uncle Frank, this is a celebration." Uncle Frank didn't yield. "I know you didn't ask my brother, This house isn't yours to give. Whispers spread quickly. Mr. Lawson shifted uncomfortably. I saw Edward Klein standing near the back entrance briefcase at his side, waiting his moment. He stepped forward with calm authority. Good afternoon. I'm Edward Klein, George Harlan's attorney. George requested I address certain matters today. Dad's face went ashen. Edward opened his briefcase, laying out documents on a nearby table. The deed to this residence remains in George's name. No transfer was recorded. Your family has occupied it rent-free for 10 years. Gasps rippled through the group. Edward continued without pause. 5 years ago, George established an irrevocable trust. He anticipated certain patterns and designated Laura as sole beneficiary for the inheritance and related assets. He held up the email thread. David inquired about the deed status 5 years ago and knew it had not transferred yet, authorized the withdrawal of $450,000. Mr. Lawson stepped back. If this involves unauthorized funds, I cannot proceed. The partnership is canceled. Kevin's face drained. You can't just... Edward looked directly at him. The amount must be repaid within 30 days. Failure leads to litigation. Liquidating the property may be required. I stepped forward, then voice clear in the sudden silence. Grandpa intended this for me. You took it without permission. Mom warned me I'd carry the guilt if I told him. Dad called it business. Kevin, you accepted the keys like it was owed. I looked straight at them. I'm finished. Eviction notice will be sent next week. No extensions. No second chances. The room froze, the lake outside reflecting stunned expressions. When everything shattered at that party, I couldn't help wondering whether a family could ever repair itself after trust had been broken so completely. The weeks after the anniversary unraveled everything in slow motion. Kevin rushed to list the house, hoping to cover the repayment, but the market had cooled and buyers negotiated hard. He sold at a $75,000 loss, the shortfall cratering his credit score overnight. When his employer ran the mandatory background check for a promotion track, the financial red flags triggered an automatic rejection. He lost the salesman job he'd built his identity around, the one that paid for the lifestyle Sarah's family expected. She broke it off with a brief message, her parents unwilling to link their name to the scandal. Kevin moved back into my parents' house, the spare bedroom replacing the gated community he'd boasted about. Dad's fallout with Mr. Lawson happened fast. Lawson withdrew from the partnership the next business day, citing irreconcilable trust issues and potential liability. Within a month, the State Real Estate Board opened an investigation into asset misrepresentation, the complaint citing the unauthorized use of Grandpa's funds. Legal fees mounted quickly, retainers document preparation hearings, and Dad's license was suspended pending resolution. Clients vanished, deals collapsed, and the business he'd spent decades growing shrank to a handful of low-value listings. Mom retreated from her suburban Seattle social circle. Invitations dried up, old friends distanced themselves, and she stopped attending events where questions about the family might arise. She spent days alone in the house that no longer belonged to her, the lake view a constant reminder of what had been lost. Grandpa passed 3 weeks after the party peacefully in the nursing home as the sun set over the water. I sat with him that final afternoon, holding his hand while the monitors slowed. His breathing grew shallow, but his grip stayed firm until the end. His last words came in a whisper. "You're free now, Laura." The funeral was simple. Just Uncle Frank, a few old colleagues, and me. No flowers, no speeches beyond what needed saying. I inherited the house by the lake, the trust funds, and the remaining accounts exactly as Grandpa had structured. I sold my apartment and moved in, turning the familiar rooms into something new, the lake visible from every window. I kept the routine, simple morning coffee on the porch, walks along the shore when the water was calm. I didn't contact my parents or Kevin. No calls, no texts, no offers of reconciliation. The silence felt like the only honest response left. In America, standing up for yourself often means facing real consequences, legal battles, severed relationships, financial strain, but it also teaches self-worth over toxic ties. Grandpa's final gift wasn't the money or the property, It was the freedom to choose my life without carrying the weight of people who had never valued it. Oh my kung li doi kiden muon yung dai ta hum ken toxic family de sung tot. The lake reflects the sky every morning, steady and unchanged, and I walk its edge knowing I've finally claimed my place in it. Thank you all for taking the time to watch the video. If you found this story meaningful, don't forget to leave a comment, sharing your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any upcoming videos.